Next, we're turning to geographic regression discontinuity. I currently have a draft of the paper that I'm preparing to submit to a special issue of the journal using this exact sort of technique. Alicia's paper was a model that I used to try to understand how to do this and how to apply this, not just in like a problem set, but in an actual journal article, answering a real research question. So I think it was great for that, and that's why I wanted to include this one here. Regression discontinuity designs have become popular, although in my little corner of research, more the occupational licensing literature, it hasn't been used so much. So I guess I'm lucky in that regard that I can still get in on this early when it's such a well-developed technique. Now, the intuition behind the geographic regression discontinuity is actually fairly simple. So we find two things, in this case, two very similar businesses. They're alike in just about every way, except one is located on one side of a state border and the other is located on the opposite side of the border. And so we can identify the specific differences across the border between those two states. In this case, Alicia was looking at occupational licensing requirements. We can hold everything else constant or almost everything else constant because we're looking at two businesses that are so close together. So my wife is from Wilmington, Delaware, which is right up against the Pennsylvania border. If you take Route 202, the local business highway, you literally have two businesses at one point that are about 20 feet apart, but one's in the state of Delaware, one's in the state of PA. So by focusing our comparison on businesses like that are really close, they're in the same market and all that stuff, the only real difference is that state border there between them, we can remove the effects of a lot of things. And this can be really powerful for our analysis. So Alicia's specific question was looking at the effects of occupational licensing requirements for where firms that employed licensed cosmetologists choose to locate. So do we see more on the side of the border with lower licensing requirements, or do we not see a difference between the two? So I'll spare you the long background on occupational licensing, which is my research area, so I could do in my sleep, but unfortunately that puts other people to sleep. But using this type of analysis, it allowed her to use a cross-section of regulatory data. Normally, what we want to do is identify some policy change and compare before or after. But the geographic component of our analysis here allows us to use a cross-section, or allowed her to use a cross-section. So gathering licensing requirements for a single profession for all 50 states, because states set these requirements, so they all differ at least slightly. It can be annoying to do all that. But if you're going back in time and trying to find licensing fees or identifying when things like education requirements change, it can be almost impossible. So a spatial model can allow you to do a good analysis with just a cross-section of data. And because of the issue with data in economics, it's always important to find workarounds like this. So that's why geographic regression discontinuity is something that has been popular in a lot of different like state regulatory areas, because it allows us to use a cross-section of the actual requirement data. We don't have to identify policy changes to get any sort of empirical analysis. I don't want to dig in too much of this, but her analysis involves two parts. First, there's a density manipulation test to see if there's a difference across borders. That kind of identifies whether there is a difference between the two or not. Then she does a logistic function to estimate the differences across state borders. That's a dummy variable, 1-0 outcome for whether a firm is located there or not. She also does the geographic regression discontinuity as a second part of her analysis, using this to estimate the effect of licensing requirements on firm employment. So this article is an excellent bridge between regional economics, so things like location decisions and competition between states, different markets, labor institutions, so things like occupational licensing, focusing on that specifically, and on spatial quasi-experimental methods of border continuities, the geographic regression discontinuity. All right, and I'll briefly touch on the recommended paper here, the effect of private police on crime. So I actually hadn't read this paper before looking for something to accompany Alicia's article. But this is a great example of how to use geographic regression discontinuity and how to think about applying geography where this sort of the spatial aspect of the effects of whatever change you're looking at can be really important. So we should expect the presence of law enforcement to have a different impact in different physical places. So when I see a cop sitting on the side of the road with their radar gun out on Interstate 70 when I drive back to Morgantown from Delaware, I slow down to the speed limit normally, or at least close to the speed limit. And then I keep my speed reasonable for several miles afterwards before going back to, cruising speed on an open highway. So it's reasonable to assume that the presence of a police officer would influence crime decisions, if you want to call it that, in their immediate presence. But at a certain point, they may not alter someone's crime decisions as you get farther and farther away from that particular cop. So using geography here it's perfect. It's a great application of using space to answer a question. Again, this isn't something that you have to read. I know we're talking about the very end of the semester, coming out of holidays and going into other holidays. But if you do have the time, at least do the heavy skimming that academics like to do, where they sort of skim through it, so it only takes like 5-10 minutes to read, so you can get a lot of the info, even if you're not, doing a deep dive. Because I think how they set it up and think about this problem is very worthwhile, and it's a good model for us to think about for if we want to do our own work on some sort of similar question later.